cut out a little part of the apple and ate the rest of it. What's interesting about this is that in the year 2000, the United States used, for agricultural purposes, 8 times more pesticides than it used in 1940, and lost more of its crops, nevertheless. Which, of course, leads to the point that these pesticides generate resistance. The more they're used, the more the bugs mutate and resist. Imagine the billions of dollars spent to expose farm workers and market workers and farmers to pesticides with the aerial sprays and the manual sprays. We're losing more today to pests than in 1940. Principle number 5. Private industries have very little incentive to improve their environmental practices. Our consumption choices must encourage and support good behavior. Our political choices must support government regulation. Well, in the old days, there wasn't much government regulation. To the extent that they regulated themselves, it was through producer cooperatives in order to deal with the economic forces arrayed against them, to deal with high railroad rates and bank interest loans and big buyers that would not give them an adequate price, or just the general economic instability. The old farmer had every incentive to improve what was then known husbandry, animal and plant husbandry, because if the farmer didn't, the farm family paid the price. There was a direct incentive, a direct accountability. There were no agents and intermediaries and escape from responsibility. In terms of the political choices, farmers are politically active. Part of it is they wanted price supports, obviously, because of the gyration in their prices. But by and large, they weren't political enough. And the synthetic chemical industry, the pesticide, herbicide industry, nitrogen fertilizer industry, began moving in. And now it's the genetic engineering industry. And in relentless marketing, engaged in inroads where the farmers lost their sense of self-taught ecology and became more and more vulnerable to the quick fix. And the quick fix meant that they bought more products from DuPont and Union Carbide and Monsanto. And now they're losing their independence. And they're becoming more indentured to the seed monopoly and to the argument that they will spend less time weeding their fields if they use Monsanto Ready Roundup with Monsanto engineered corn or engineered soy. So basically they traded convenience for an unknown. And the farmers who didn't want to use genetically engineered seed would find that their fields were invaded by migrating genetically engineered seeds in nearby fields of other farmers who did use it. And so they lost their ability to defend the integrity of their land and were given misleading advertisements and promotions, so they were buying more than even they needed of these chemicals, which was severely deteriorating the nutrient value of the soil. And that is a very serious problem today in the United States. Principle 6. Support thoughtful innovations in manufacturing and production. Hint, drilling for oil is no longer an innovation. Well, that doesn't apply very much to the old farmer, but it's interesting how in some areas they did use wind power. In some areas they did use hydropower, where they could. And in some areas they did use wood pulp, or the waste from their agricultural harvest. And now, look at Brazil, didn't have much oil, had a lot of people, has been the leader in biofuels with sugarcane waste, which now supply a very substantial percentage of their motor vehicle fuel. Why did they become the world leader? Because they had to. They couldn't afford to import all that oil, so they became innovative. The scarcity led to innovation. Principle 7, prioritize. Think hardest when buying large products. Don't drive yourself mad fretting over the small one. It's easy to be distracted by the paper bag puzzle, but an energy-sucking refrigerator is much more worthy of your attention. The efficiency of household appliances is improving quite significantly. The old farmer didn't have to buy large objects, and he didn't have the luxury of fretting over small matters. He always had to keep the priorities high in his mind. I'm always saying he because in old days, pretty patriarchal society. It's quite interesting to see how the more complex a society is, the more the attraction of trivia, the more people get drawn into smaller priorities, lose the big picture. When you lose the big picture, you cannot integrate the necessary inputs for big advances and big improvements. Principle number 8, vote. Political engagement enables the spread of environmentally conscious policies. Without public action, thoughtful individuals are swimming upstream. The older farmers were very politically engaged in our country, and I'm sure in yours as well. They knew that they couldn't get many allies in the rest of society that didn't understand them and was living in the cities and received the benefits and didn't even know how their food was grown or how their fiber was developed. So farmers in the United States generated the most important political reform movement in our history. It started in 1887 in East Texas and spread north and west and east. Elected state legislatures, elected governors, elected senators, elected representatives in Washington. Over the period of 20-25 years, the populist progressive movement remains to this day the most fundamental economic and political reform movement. They reformed part of the electoral system. We got the initiative, referendum recall. We got producer co-ops. We got even oil co-ops. The farmers had their own oil wells, their own pipelines, their own gas stations. And a lot of this benefited the cities, it benefited the more populated areas. In North Dakota, especially, your ethnic group, Scandinavians, formed the Nonpartisan League, which developed to this day institutions which people are talking about, especially the Bank of North Dakota. The Bank of North Dakota is publicly owned, and because of its stable and accountable structure, it did not fail in the 2008 Wall Street collapse. And North Dakota is today the most economically prosperous state in the country, where all these other commercial banks, all these other Wall Street banks, and a lot of small banks around the country, as a result, were failing or had to be bailed out or supported. So the political organization of environmentalism is very important. It's not enough just to put out the evidence about global warming and oil spills and nuclear power. These changes, again, that have to be imposed on large corporations can come from many directions, but one direction that has to come from is the role of government. It has to come from the role of government. It can come from consumer feedback, rejection, acceptance, rejection of bad products, acceptance of good products, the market feedback. It could come from cooperatives. It could come from entrepreneurs, come from innovative business, which is what Kraft Kultur is engaged in, selling renewable energy. It could come from foreign competition. Japanese car competition drove our auto industry to pay more attention to fuel efficiency, for example. But the national missions have got to come through democratic governmental processes, in my judgment. Principle number 9, don't feel guilty. It only makes you feel sad. So, I don't know why that was put in there, but I'll let that stand without comment. Principle 10, enjoy what you have, the things that are yours alone, and the things that belong to none of us. Enjoy both of them. Both are nice, but the latter are precious. The latter are things that belong to none of us. These things that we cannot manufacture and should never own, the water, the air, the birds, the trees, are the foundation of life's pleasures. Without them, we're nothing. With us, there may be nothing left. It's our choice. Well, you know how many times the old agrarian economy had to think about all that? Just think of how did they enjoy themselves? They enjoyed themselves not by commercial entertainment,